que mi función principal en los días por venir, mi función como hombre, como diputado, como presidente de esta Asamblea Nacional, será recurrir a todos los procedimientos, a todas las tribunas y a todos los espacios para lograr traer de vuelta a Nicolás Maduro Moros, mi hermano, mi presidente.
This is Jorge Rodriguez. Here he is being sworn in as President of Venezuela's National Assembly, a role which he has held since 2021.
Juro por la patria. Juro por la valentía y la sangre derramada de nuestras soldadas y soldados caídos en los hechos abominables del pasado 3 de enero. Juro por la vida plena que nuestra patria se merece.
Rodriguez is part of a powerful duo in Venezuelan politics. His sister, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, having just been appointed as Venezuela's interim president. They also come from a political family, their father having been a Marxist politician who was involved in the kidnapping of an American businessman.
First of all, I'm planning to go back to Venezuela as soon as possible. As I've always said, Sean, every day I make a decision where I am more useful for a cause. I spoke with President Trump on October 10th, the same day the prize was announced. Not since then, but I do want to say today, on behalf of the Venezuelan people, how grateful we are for his courageous vision.
So does the Secretary of State, as he's briefing you, does he have answers to these questions? I mean, I suppose there's 2 layers to this. One, does he have answers? And 2, how does he square the circle of the fact that what he has been saying is different than what Trump is saying?
Well, so it's not so much a question of whether he has the answers. No, he doesn't have the answers because he doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. Yep. What's really concerning is that he doesn't have a plan. And this is, of course, what hurt us in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. There's no plan for the day after. Now, you could imagine a plan. The Nobel Prize winner who the president completely delegitimized, you could have brought her in. We've tried that before. You could have surrounded her with enough security and said, this is the legitimate president of Venezuela. That may not be a good plan, but it's a plan. What we don't have right now is any plan other than to hope that
Delcy Rodriguez is going to do what Trump tells her to do
magical things that we want her to do, even though we have no ability to protect her. And meanwhile, of course, Donald Trump is threatening her.
So when you get, a classified briefing, I mean, obviously, definitionally, that means there's some things you can and can't share. But when Rubio says, I've talked to her, the implication being, and Trump says she has told us, he said this in the press conference, she's going to do everything we want. Then she comes and basically says, go jump off a bridge.
Right.
Okay, and then people say, well, that's performative. She actually is going to do what they want, but she doesn't want the security services to know it. I mean, does anyone deserve any kind of a credit for any kind of a grand plan like that, or is that just...
Like anyone else on this planet, Delcy Rodriguez is going to do what she needs to do to stay alive. And she is now surrounded by a lot of Venezuelan men who have their livelihoods wrapped up in the regime of Maduro. Maduro's gone from it.
Yeah.
And you think Delcy Rodriguez is going to say to those men with guns, yeah, I'm doing what Donald Trump and Marco Rubio want me to do. It's not just not a plan. It's sort of insane on the face of it.
You voted for this president 3 times. Is this what you voted for?
Not only did I vote for the president 3 times, I was one of the few Republicans that stood by him early on when the rest of the Republicans turned their back on him. I also campaigned all over the country for him and attended many of those rallies where the campaign promises were no more foreign wars, no more regime change, and putting the American people first. Caitlin, those are the things that I believe on and have stood on in principle, not only in principle, but by actions as well. I never voted to fund Ukraine. I never voted to fund any of the foreign wars, and I worked hard to get rid of foreign aid and funding foreign governments and foreign people. That's what I believe in. However, it is concerning to see what's happening and the direction that the Trump administration is moving in. We can say, thankfully, that Maduro has been arrested. We can say we're happy for the Venezuelan people, but we can also look to all the regime changes before in Iraq and Libya and Syria, and we said the same things for the people of those countries. But then we watch those countries fall into turmoil and civil war, and we watch the rise of ISIS and terrorism, and we watch U.S. troops remain in those countries for a very long time, and many flag-draped coffins come home. And that's what many Americans don't want to see happen.
You might have expected President Trump to monitor that high-stakes capture of Venezuela President Maduro from the Oval Office or the Situation Room, but he was actually in Florida in a makeshift space at his Mar-a-Lago club, transformed into a war room covered with black drape and fitted with secure internet lines, a sophisticated phone system, and several monitors, including a live feed of posts from the social media platform X. Then hours later, Trump addressed the nation from the Mar-a-Lago Tea Room. That's a room with an elaborate tinted ceiling and a three-tiered crystal chandelier where he fielded questions from reporters and announced that the U.S. would run Venezuela. Meanwhile, Mar-a-Lago guests were arriving at the club as usual. They were dressed in their tennis whites, driving BMWs and Tesla Cybertrucks with security, seated under those yellow and white umbrellas at the beach club and taking in views of the Atlantic. That evening, Trump greeted club members dining on the crowded, glitzy patio, and they cheered his momentous mission. Now, the setup for this operation was constructed in a discreet area of the club away from those guests, according to one person familiar with the matter. But it's not the first time there's been potential intersection between club members and sensitive national security issues. Trump huddled with then Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on the patio after a North Korean missile launch. The two discussed how to respond as guests posted photos on social media. And since then, the president and his team have enacted tighter rules for guests snapping photos. The club is fortified with snipers, bomb-sniffing dogs, and boats patrolling the intracoastal waterway.
The self-proclaimed president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife finally were presented for an arraignment today in the SDNY in a Manhattan courtroom, standing accused of 4 very serious charges for Maduro and 3 for his wife. One of them is participating in a narco-terrorism conspiracy. The other one was conspiring to import cocaine into the country. A third one involving using and carrying machine guns and destructive devices in furtherance of these conspiracies, and conspiring to use and carry such items in relation to narco-terrorism as well. Each of these carries mandatory minimums of at least 10 years in prison and a maximum of life in prison. Now, the prosecution has not yet handed over discovery in this matter. They await a protective order to be agreed upon between the different parties. They also want to have an opportunity to have a lengthy and voluminous and complex motion practice, likely to discuss whether he will have immunity as a head of state or international law implications. And they will also discuss the legality of his removal from Venezuela. They have agreed to waive his speedy trial right, which is his constitutional right as a defendant in a United States criminal court, until March 17th, their next court appearance. This has been years in the making. A federal jury indicting this matter, and very serious charges, and many co-defendants at task. There's a lot to unpack here in terms of what the defenses might potentially be. Maduro himself has Julian Assange's attorney, likely to have a lot of international law intersections here, and of course the legality of his removal. For his wife, she has 3 of those 4 charges. The question remains, will they be tried together? Will she seek to be separated from him in that trial, or other co-defendants as well? And of course, bail still on the horizon. They agreed not to request it at this time, but they reserve the right to go back and ask for it at a later date. A judge will only grant them bail to be released pending a trial, which is likely to take place next year, if the judge can be assured of their return to this courtroom to stand trial.
The current home of ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, has been widely described as hell on earth. As a former federal prosecutor in New York, I've been inside the MDC many times, and I can tell you that's true. Recent or current high-profile inmates at the MDC include Sean Diddy Combs, Ghislaine Maxwell, Luigi Mangione, R. Kelly, and former crypto mogul Sam Bankman-Fried. Now, Nicolas Maduro, who just days ago lived in a presidential palace in Venezuela, is being held in one of the most notorious federal prisons in the United States ahead of his trial. The MDC is a massive building on the western edge of Brooklyn, just off the East River, within sight of the Statue of Liberty. The MDC is currently the only federal correctional facility in all of New York City, and it has a history of overcrowding. It currently houses about 1,300 federal inmates. The facility is notorious for brutal conditions: poor sanitation, frequent power outages and losses of heat in winter, inadequate medical services. 2 inmates were killed at the MDC in 2024. And in March 2025, DOJ charged MDC inmates and a prison guard with acts of violence and with running a contraband smuggling operation inside the prison. Federal judges have described conditions at the MDC as barbaric and contemptuous of human dignity. Some judges have refused to send people to the MDC, granting bail or reduced sentences because of conditions at the facility. A Bureau of Prisons spokesperson told CNN in 2024 that BOP had taken steps to increase staffing and to address hundreds of outstanding maintenance issues that had not been resolved. The official said that Bureau of Prisons would continue to work to improve conditions at the prison.
I just got out of court here in New York where Nicolas Maduro just pleaded not guilty along with his wife to the charges that they face, as protesters have been out here throughout. Now, one of the more interesting things that happened during the hearing came simply when the judge asked him to confirm his identity, where he simply could have just said, yes, I'm Nicolas Maduro. He launched into saying that he is the constitutional president of Venezuela, that he is essentially being treated as a prisoner of war, that he's been kidnapped, taken from his home in Caracas, when the judge jumped in and said, okay, we'll get to that later. For now, we just needed to know your name. His wife was there as well. I mentioned she pleaded not guilty. Both of them were speaking in Spanish as the rest of the court listened through interpretation. His wife did seem to be battling some injuries, some visible injuries on her face, and it was something that her defense acknowledged over the course of the hearing. And then as the hearing wrapped up, a protester stood up in the hearing and essentially yelled at Maduro, "You will pay for what you have done." And Maduro turned around and acknowledging that person, saying, essentially, "I am a man of God." And that was how the hearing ended.